So welcome back to Sound Bites, a show about good people doing good things in our local food and drink industry. Today I'm talking with Benjamin Bridge's head winemaker, Jean-Benoit Deslauriers, about the importance of biodiversity, and Kyla Welton, who manages a diverse mix of jobs at the winery, but it's really about the culinary experience and the events. We're going to talk to Kyla about foraging and how you can benefit wild pollinators at your own home. So I think if you ask the average wine lover to paint a picture of a great vineyard, you're likely to get this image of large swaths of land, rolling hills, perfectly manicured vines. And I think we've convinced ourselves that's what the perfect vineyard is. But if we go back to the 1950s, even 60s, before the mass commercialization of vineyards, you probably saw something different. You probably saw smaller plots of land, woodlands encompassing them, with much richer vegetation and diversity. And so I think it's interesting to talk about what you're doing at Benjamin Bridge in terms of bringing back biodiversity to the vineyard space and how you're working with it, not only in the winery, but on the culinary side. But maybe I can start with Jean-Benoit. And just can you talk about a little bit of what is biodiversity and why is it important for a vineyard like yourself to embrace biodiversity?
Well, good morning, Mark. Thank you so much for having Kyla and I. And I'll be brief because I would want mostly Kyla to speak to this. But perhaps, like one perspective that we could take on the importance of biodiversity as it pertains to viticulture and growing grapes is that in a lot of cases, the genetic material that we're growing is not indigenous to our ecosystem. And I think that everyone that has some degree of familiarity with what makes a wine interesting and where lies the merit in winemaking, it's always in connection to place. And therefore, the proposition of creating products that cannot be replicated anywhere else but in your own ecosystem, in your own growing environment. So you need to be able to capture, whatever the traits, the marker, the stamps of that environment are. And if you can convey that in your wine, and obviously the least amount of interventions, the better to be successful at that, then that's mission accomplished. So that would be the proposition of an artisanal wine. And where biodiversity can really make a difference is that, again, the genetic material, whether it's the vinifera vines from Europe that have been strictly propagated. So in terms of, kind of their spreading in the biosphere. So in the world, it's not the result of, a tremendous amount of sex and breeding. It's the same plants that are multiplied in greenhouses and propagated that way. So if we're going to replace things that are indigenous to our ecosystem by, let's say, European genetic material and European plants, the very least that we can do is to try to do this in a way that is somewhat symbiotic, with our surroundings. So you have to be very, very humble if you're going to do something like that, affect, a change or make a modification to a natural ecosystem. And so biodiversity is the thing that makes that possible, because without it, it could very well be a questionable practice.
Sure. And I think we could go in and talk about all the benefits of biodiversity because it extends, I think in terms of vine health and just less interference, I'm sure, from the winemaking side and the viticultural side in terms of utilizing nature to do its job. So Kyla, how do you embrace biodiversity and what you do in terms of creating culinary experience at Benjamin Bridge?
Yeah, absolutely. So I manage our biodiversity program, which is within our culinary garden, and it also goes into the vineyard as well. So, like Jean-Benoit said, we're thinking about vine health and how we can, make sure our vines are as healthy as possible to produce this amazing artisanal product. But, here at Benjamin Bridge in particular, we are in the Gaspereau Valley, which is this amazing, special, gorgeous property that's full of native flora and fauna, close to the Gaspereau River. And we do have over 100 acres here. So part of the program is also about how we can nurture that native flora and fauna and kind of give back to the land a little bit, because we are taking quite a bit from it and expecting a lot from it. So kind of thinking from the ground up, those microorganisms in the soil are kind of a key factor in the health of everything kind of working its way up through the food chain and into the ecosystem. So on my side of things, what I'm doing is trying to think of how we can kind of nurture that. So limiting the amount that we're tilling. When we are tilling, we're doing interplantings of cover crops, which does help with everything from the microorganisms in the soil to carbon sequestration. And then in terms of our culinary garden, crop rotation, planting, again, cover crops again with white clover, focusing on nitrogen fixation, and, having as many indigenous perennial plants as we possibly can that are focused on the pollinators through different parts of the season. We also have, of course, our own apiary. So the bees are kind of a key factor in the pollination of everything surrounding the vine. So even though the vines themselves are actually wind pollinated, having the health of everything surrounding the vines does have a sort of indirect and symbiotic effect on the health of the vines themselves. So keeping everything healthy isn't just about the vines, it's sort of about everything around it. So that's where building our culinary program and finding a way to make it sustainable where we are also doing something that's going to be beneficial to the land is sort of where my brain is kind of always at when I'm thinking about this program and what we can do to improve it. We also are focused on composting. So we're figuring out a way to compost our pumice, which is like the stems and seeds that are left over, of course, from the grape pressing process, and how we can work that back not only into the garden, but into the vineyard as well. So that's a big part of what I do.
Amazing. I'll just say that. But an interesting word, or two words that both used, is native and indigenous. And one of the great efforts done by Benjamin Bridge is to work with the First Nations. And is there, in a way, are you celebrating or thinking about what was grown or what naturally grew in the Gaspereau Valley before the Europeans, and how does that play into your thought process?
It is a little tricky with some of the actual plants that would have been here before. It's harder to cultivate those because they do require cold stratification, and it can be very challenging. And there isn't a lot of nurseries that kind of focus on those plants, but it is something that in the future, I think a lot of nurseries you are seeing kind of going in that direction. But yeah, it's definitely something that we think about, and I would say the direction that we're looking to go in the future for sure.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing project that you guys are doing. So tell us about the weekend. So you have an event which is about foraging and biodiversity. So give us a little Coles Notes version of what that is.
Yeah, of course. So like I said, with the biodiversity program, I'm trying to not only do all the things I mentioned, but also make it sustainable, for us as a business. And how can the missing link that I think I've been thinking about over the last couple of years is the guest experience. And how can we, share this project more with people who are coming to visit the winery? So this event is very intimate. It's a small event. We're doing 12 to 14 people. This is the first one. And I hope to do many more after this and have it be kind of a regular event that we have here throughout different seasons and different iterations. So essentially, folks will show up. We'll be greeted with a lovely glass of bubbly, and we'll stroll down to the garden where we talk about our farming practices and sort of the things I just focused on. We'll chat about the vines and, what we have going on the property at the moment. Once we get down to the garden, we're actually going to do a little bit of harvesting. We'll be chatting about the bees. We're all going to harvest together. So everybody has their own basket. We'll wash the veg down in the garden, and we'll actually walk across, following the river down to this beautiful station we have riverside with some tables and a couple of campfires. And we'll be doing, a little bit of grilling, a little bit of chatting about how you can utilize what you have in your garden, what you're growing, things that you can grow that are going to be beneficial to the pollinators and to, your little mini ecosystem in your backyard, to the birds. And we'll share like a very light lunch together, again, paired with some lovely wine, because of course that is going to be a big part of it too. There'll be a little bit of veg that they'll get to take home, a little package for them to take as well. And that's the plan.
Sign me up for the next one. I got to get a ticket. So maybe to end on a slightly lighter note, I think as wine people, we're food lovers, and as food lovers, you're probably a wine lover too. What's a dish and wine pairing that you're excited about that reflects for the current climate? What are you excited to eat and drink right now based on this idea of foraging and biodiversity? So Jean-Benoit, what are you eating and drinking now?
Well, again, I would want to turn it over to Kyla, and I'll volunteer. I'll volunteer a little something maybe at the end. But Kyla, what comes to mind for you? Considering your connection to this place, what you've got kind of in the agricultural pipelines, and our wines that obviously you are so familiar with.
Absolutely. So I would say what I'm personally excited about drinking right now is probably our Wild Rock, which is a Sauvignon Blanc, a really light, really refreshing, balanced acidity, easy to drink, beautiful for these hot summer days. And in terms of like what I would probably pair it with is right now in the garden, we've got some beautiful zucchinis, young zucchinis coming up that I would probably lightly grill and have a really fresh salad, and probably pair some lightly grilled fish on this as well. Yeah, something really fresh and bright and light.
I wish I had a bottle of Wild Rock right now, because producer Brendan dropped off a little box of chanterelles for me that I thought maybe we could just saute lightly with some fresh herbs, little fresh cheese like ricotta, and that wine might be pretty good. So I'm not letting you off the hook, JB. So you got to come up with we got to get you in the kitchen
for sure. And I do have something in mind. Kyla will attest that. I'm partial to the low to no, I guess, not segment or category, but that space. So low to no alcohol. And much like, Kyla alluded to, in many, many, many circumstances, the wines end up being complementary, to something else that we're doing. That is not a fermentation or alcoholic in nature. In this case, like her culinary pursuits and biodiversity. But if you look at what we're trying to do, the common denominator is we're trying to create extraordinary experiences, sensory or otherwise, that are connected to place and this ecosystem, this tidal ecosystem that's unique in the world. And to me, you can absolutely do that within, kind of that, in that space of low to no alcohol. And our piquettes come to mind because much like composting, it is, the end, or that final chapter that's really, really important, in sustainable practices of, kind of the life cycle of the grape skins. And so instead of discarding them prematurely, we're extracting all the terpenes and the aromatics and the antioxidants, and creating these low alcohol products that are absolutely delicious, and that really will allow all kind of like lifestyles and perspective to partake in connecting to this special place.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that brand and what you're doing has a lot of value in terms of reusing those grapes, but also I think, we all need to live a little more balanced lifestyle these days. And that low to no alcohol movement is here to stay. And I think it's going to be increasingly part of our lives. So I want to thank you both for all that you do. And I say good luck to the event on Sunday. And thanks for being great stewards for our environment and for our community. So thanks both for joining.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Kyla, also for for being in our lives. Like, it's an absolute pleasure, to be working with you every day. So.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you both.